Today on Just My Opinion, we are going to be talking about nightmare home inspections, surprises that are found, unexpected issues, and ways to prevent them with my guest, Taylor Made. This is Jessica Duncan's Just My Opinion, and I'm Jessica. There's no handbook to owning a home. That's why I go beyond the transaction to share my tips and opinions to make adulting simple. I am so excited that today I have my home inspector, my friend, the person I trust to inspect the properties that we own and purchase, Taylor Smith with Taylor Made Home Inspections. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yes.
Hopefully I can get you some good content, some good information for your friends and your clients.
Oh, I'm sure you will. You're always my go-to with questions, and I call you all the time with them. So
yeah, same here.
We work together, right? Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background. So you're Taylor Smith. You own Taylor Made Home Inspections, and you are a master inspector.
Yeah, certified master inspector.
Certified master inspector. Those are very important things.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a home inspector.
Well, I've been doing this, this is 2025 is the 11th year I've been doing this. So
longer than I've been in real estate. You
really?
got me by 1 year.
Oh, there we go.
Well,
barely.
For other people, not investing, but yeah.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 11 years. It's, when I started, I didn't have any gray hair, and now I'm more gray than brown. So yeah, gosh, I go back to my dad was a big impact on how I got to doing what I'm doing. Not only was it his idea for me to do home inspections, but I remember growing up and I think I was in 6th grade when we started building our cabin in West Virginia. And I wired my first home when I was in 6th grade. So
awesome.
I don't know how old that is, probably 12 years old-ish, 12 or 13, but just crazy having that experience back then, doing that, learning, just watching him, how he does a lot of stuff and gleaning from that. And now I'm able to apply what I've learned over the years, building a couple houses with him.
And y'all are still doing projects together. He was just in town helping you remodel your current house, right?
Yeah. He got here the day after Christmas, and he's 70 years old, and he was out working me. He's laying tile, knocking down walls in our bathroom remodel. So yeah, he was super helpful with that. So
I know you were appreciating the help, huh?
Yes, I was. It was free labor.
That's right.
But you got to see his grandkids too, so that was good.
Bonus for him, bonus for you. It all works out. Well, what do you think, not just you, but let's say someone is looking for a home inspector. What do you think they should be looking for in a good home inspector?
Easy to say is experience.
You mean I don't need the guy that just started last week?
No, you don't. Well, we were all there at some point. That was me 11 years ago. But yeah, it's definitely experience is super important. I know in the last few years, since COVID and all the craziness that was around that, there's been a lot of new guys coming in the last 5 years, I feel like even more in the last 2 years. They may have good backgrounds and whatnot, but it's very different trying to keep up with not only everything in the home you got to look at, but also what are the insurance standards in Florida? What are some things that are habitual for builders in this area? Luckily in Pensacola, we only have really a handful of builders here for the most part. And then some of the older homes, I don't know who built them back in the day, but they're very similar home to home. So if you aren't familiar with the market here specifically, it can create some problems with things that you may not see or catch as a newer person until you have experienced it a couple times. Yeah, certainly experience is very key in picking an inspector. Communication is huge. Not only do they need to be good and thorough at their job, but also how do they convey it? I think we've had this conversation before too. You want a thorough inspector because you want to protect the clients and their investment, but at the same time, you don't want an alarmist. There's a difference between being thorough and being an alarmist.
Absolutely.
You definitely want to tell them everything, but you don't want to be like, your gutters terminate near the foundation with the downspout. You're going to have foundation issues. You don't want to exemplify or hypothesize on what may happen or whatnot. You just want to say and to report on what it is.
Exactly. The facts, right?
Yeah. And then that's where you come in and have a conversation with them and kind of direct them on things.
So a lot of these new home inspectors, I can't tell you how many times people have reached out to me, hey, I started a home inspection company, or my family member, someone I know started a home inspection company. Will you use them? And so there's several that I've actually let come behind after you and do another home inspection on a house that's vacant that they didn't mind, so that I could just sort of compare and say, hey, you missed this, or hey, the way you presented this wasn't good. I never give them your home inspection, but just to help them and give them some advice. And they always want me to use them. And I say, well, hang on, if you were my customer and you were buying a house, how would you feel if I recommended someone who it's their first time doing them, or the first couple doing them? Like, you wouldn't appreciate that. Yeah. I'll help you in any way I can, But like until you have a little bit more experience or, let me see what you can do. Because there are some that have had experience in the construction field or whatever that may be good home inspectors. But I can't just hire someone without knowing, right? Their experience. And so I'm always cautious of that. You obviously are my go-to and the one I hire all the time. And we never seem to have a time where we have to go to anyone else because you always make us a priority, which we appreciate. Yeah. And what you're talking about there on the clarity of the home inspection, that is so huge. There are some people that make it sound like the house is going to burn down when it's really not. Or they make something that really is a big deal so minor sounding, where I feel like you're really good at presenting the facts, not putting your opinion in. But then whenever we have questions, you're always open to let us go, hey, well, what does this mean? Or how do you feel about this? Or what's going on here? And I mean, you just had a great one here recently. I say great, the contract got canceled, but you protected my buyer, which is ultimately what I want. They were buying a house and you saw some things on there and recommended another inspection, recommended a foundation inspection, which I appreciate because it turned out to be about $40,000 worth of foundation work. And thankfully they knew that and were able to make a decision not to move forward with that property. You protected them and they were so appreciative of that.
She even emailed me to thank me.
Yes, they were. They were so happy because, I mean, they'd rather know that now than afterwards. And that was just something that you saw and were like, hey, this could be an issue. Maybe investigate this a little bit more. So we really appreciate that. And that's one thing I've loved about your inspections, though. There are some inspectors that basically say, call these other people that won't give their opinion. Hey, you need to call an AC person, you need to call a roofer, you need to call. Now you do when there's an issue that we need to, you tell us that, but you're not just blanketly across the board telling us to call everyone else and not giving us any opinion.
Yeah, you got to find that medium ground. Obviously you're not a specialist as a home inspector. I always like to use the analogy, think of like your primary care physician. They know a little bit about everything, but they're not a specialist. You don't want them to do brain surgery on you. They're going to refer you to a brain surgeon. So like, for instance, like I know a little bit about roofing, but I'm not going to tell you how to repair a roof job. It's an inspector's job to observe and report. Like you said, we can tell you to go to the specialist if you need to. We can give you an opinion verbally, but usually in my reports, I'm going to observe, tell you what I observed, report on it, and give you the information. And if you have need for further detail, obviously I'm a resource, I'm available. We talked about clarity is important, but also availability.
Absolutely.
Usually when you call me, if I don't answer, I'm calling you right back because I'm on the other line.
Yeah. Or under a house or in a roof.
Or under a house in a crawl space, yes. But I do have an assistant now, so it helps with that sometimes. But availability to talk and clarify things both to the realtor and to the client is super important because sometimes there's only so much I can convey in text. And that's one thing, too, I love when clients are actually able to attend the inspections. Generally, I want them there at the end because sometimes you get, the father comes along, follows you everywhere or whatnot. But
yeah, that's important to talk about. So customers always ask me, should I attend the inspection? And I'm like, no, you're going to distract him. If you're going to go at the very end. Let him do his job because if you're following him around, he is not going to be and asking him questions. He's not going to be able to do the inspection as well. Yeah. And I always tell them, imagine you're at work working and you have someone following you around asking questions the whole time. Are you doing your job as well as you normally would?
There's definitely a flow to this career. That's one of the reasons I hired somebody to answer phones for me because I would find I would get distracted and I'd be like, okay, where am I at? Where was I at? Because it's super important that you tick all the boxes, that you check everything that you're supposed to check. You don't miss a room or not find like a hidden room or another attic access hatch or whatnot. But yeah, it's super important to stay on your flow and be consistent because otherwise you can get distracted and forget where you're at or miss something unintentionally. So
absolutely. And we don't want that, right?
No, absolutely not.
All right. So I know you got some juicy stories. There's got to be some crazy situations you've experienced. You got to share one with us.
Okay. I'll try and keep it PG-13 at least. The one that always comes to mind first, this is probably, had to have been probably in the first 3 or 4 years of me doing this. I was doing a home in Gulf Breeze. This younger couple was buying a duplex. And, I get there, I inspect the right side first, super nice, nothing crazy going on there. It's an older lady's place. It was super well maintained. And then I go over to the other side, and I think there was some miscommunication on the agent's part because it was tenant occupied on both of them. But the left side guy, I'll never forget him. He did not know we were coming, or he was told, but he didn't put it in his calendar or whatnot. But so he was at first kind of irritated that we were there. And then he was super nice about us being there, let us all come in, The buyers were there too, and their agent, and it was kind of weird. They just sat on his couch because he offered them to do that. So they were just sitting there. And then as that progressed, because my inspections are invasive to an extent.
It's a couple hours.
Yeah. I'm there and I'm opening all your cabinets. I'm looking under your sinks. I'm flushing your toilets. I'm running your heating and air, opening all your plumbing valves and whatnot. And I think he just got to the point where he was like kind of annoyed that we were still there. So this dude just goes and like turns on his music and it's like loud the whole time. And he's over there in the kitchen, just standing at the counter, jamming his head, watching us while the buyers, two of them, are sitting on the couch. And you can tell they're nervous. They got their hands on their knees. They're not sitting back. They're just forward. They're ready to run out that door if they need to. And so that was weird in that respect. But as I go through and I'm going in this guy's room, there's X-rated pictures and whatnot on the walls.
Oh, no.
And he's got a giant bottle of Astrolube beside his bed. And he's got a molded female genitalia sitting right there too.
Oh my goodness.
It was interesting. It's one of those where I mean, try and keep it PG-13-ish, but it's never leaves your mind. If anybody asks me craziest one, that was it. It was just a weird experience, weird, uncomfortable. And then I just wanted to wash my hands, didn't want to touch any more door handles in that house, didn't want to flush any toilets, turn sink, nothing. So yeah, that one was definitely memorable.
You'll never forget it.
No, I will not.
So tell us about like the biggest nightmare of a home that you did a home inspection on.
Oh gosh, there's been a lot. I mean, it's just, honestly, I'm just at the point now when I see one on the schedule and it's like old crawl space and just ancient, they all just kind of run together. It's just always going to be hours more time writing reports. I just kind of know what I'm getting into anymore. I can't think of one specifically, at least recently, that was just horrid, because I've gotten to the point, luckily I've been established enough where I can turn away a lot of those sometimes, or I just price them where, they're high enough where maybe people don't want to use me. Sometimes they still do. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I should have done higher. But yeah, they're all kind of run together. Anything that's like pre-1940s and crawl space, they just take so long.
What about bugs?
Bugs don't bother me as much. There's several homes I've been in. There's been like rats in the crawl spaces.
And you're down there.
Yeah, I'm down there with them, hanging out.
I'm glad that's you going down there.
Yeah. I always offer to the realtors when they're there. I'm like, do you want to do this part for me?
No.
Nobody's ever taken me up on it.
I asked that because here recently I was showing a house, and I will never forget this. I had a customer with me, and we were looking at this house, and it was built in 1940s, 1950s, in a pretty demanded area of town, and it was vacant. And we go inside the house. I have white pants on, and we walked straight through the house, and it had this beautiful deck out back. So we literally walked straight through the front door. And we're like, oh, look at this deck, and walked out back. As we're standing on the deck, I all of a sudden started to itch, and I looked down. Fleas from the knees down, and the house was vacant.
Yep.
So I'm like, how in the world? So then I was freaking out because my dog, I don't want to get fleas in my car and take them home to my dog. So I ended up walking around the house instead of going back through it to secure the house, get it all locked up, and then had to get all the fleas off. So we're standing in the front yard of this house, taking our shoes off. I'm trying to get all these fleas off of us before we get back in the car. And she didn't want to take them home to her dogs either.
Yep.
But I was like, wow. I called my husband. I'm like, what in the world? Where would these fleas come from? I don't know if raccoons had nested underneath, but you've got to come across stuff like that. I've had
that happen twice. Well, one time I was at the beach several years ago. I was doing a insurance inspection on this lady's home. I'm in her garage, and I'm taking the panel cover off. And I can't really see while I'm leaning down, scratching my legs. And then it just keeps getting worse. And I look down. I still can't see anything. So I put the panel cover up, and I'm just like itching my legs, and I walk back inside, and I see my legs are covered with fleas. So I ended up, luckily that was nearing the end of the inspection, and I think they were more contained in the garage area, at least.
Hopefully.
So I was able to finish that one up and go, but I had another one. It was a pre-purchase inspection about a year and a half ago, probably. It was a $600,000 home in Pace, really nice. It was only 2 years old, probably, and it was vacant. Went in there. I was there for about 20 minutes inside. And so they may have only been in a certain area, because I did the whole exterior, the roof, got inside and noticed they were crawling on my legs. And it was the same thing. Got outside, took my shoes and socks off, shook everything, tried to really look and see if I found any more. But got them all done. I called the agent, and I was like, hey, just want to let you know what's going on here. She got them taken care of. She had pest control company come out there, And so I rescheduled the inspection for the next week, and luckily they were gone when I got back.
Good. So tell us about something in an inspection maybe that you found that seemed minor, but could be a tell sign that there's something larger going on.
Well, one that first comes to mind, you talked about earlier, your recent clients that we worked with that had the cracking in the exterior brick of the home that, I thought warranted further evaluation because there were multiple areas. There were some binding of some windows and doors out of square. And, it's one of those things where I'm a visual, or all home inspectors are visual inspectors only. That we recommended foundation guy come and look at it just to make sure there's nothing going on. This home is off grade. It's 80 something years old, I think it was. And he's able to use appropriate leveling and measuring tools where he could see that there was some sagging in the beams and whatnot. So it's one of those things where you see a lot. Cracking in brick is very common in mid-century homes here. A lot of times it means nothing. A lot of times there's no problems with it. But I'm very glad that he did the advice in the inspection and did that. One other one that's easy to come to mind, I know we've specifically talked about this one, is slow to drain.
Yeah, I think I was going to bring that one up. You actually saved a client of mine years ago. I don't even know if you know all of that, but you said there was a slow drain. And so my clients were like, it's just a slow drain. It needs some Drano. And I was like, I don't know. Let's investigate this a little bit further. Let's just put it on the repair request and tell the sellers they have to fix it. Come to find out there was a snake broken off, like a snake that you clean a drain. It was broken off in the drain. They had to tear out 2 bathrooms because they were back to back on the walls and retile both of the bathrooms. Huge thing. Slow drain ended up being about a $10,000 repair.
You think it's a bottle of Drano for $10 and it ends up being 100 times that.
It is. And I think that's where a good home inspector and a good agent always come into play, is saying, hey, I know that seems minor, but actually that could be a big thing. Or there's things that people think are huge, and I'm like, oh, it's a $12 part. I just had one that you did that the buyer was really concerned about a window not staying open, or there was something with the window. And I'm like, no, actually, I think that's pretty minor. He said, no, I think we may have to replace the whole window. And I'm like, and they're impact windows on a house on pylons. So, obviously this is going to be really expensive if we had to. So I said, well, let me just reach out to my window person and get a quote real quick. Send it over. It was $230, right? So there's times that people think it's going to be something big or think it's not going to be something big, and they're completely misled on that. So that's where I love, though, when you're out on site and you come across something major, you call me right away. You're like, hey, let me go ahead and give you a warning. I found something major. Yeah.
Again, I said this earlier, you can only convey so much in a report in writing. So that's why it's really important to have that communication channel between all the people involved on the realtor side, clients being able to access you, and the inspector being available to handle calls. A lot of them just want to, when they're done with the inspection, we're done, don't bug me, don't call me.
Yeah.
But it's super important too. I mean, from the real estate aspect, I've been involved with tons of agents all over town, and it's super, you can tell when the agents don't take the time to educate their clients on the front end, what to expect, what to do when you get the report, how to go through it, what to look for, little signs and things. Obviously, your experience with that, because you've been able to catch the things that you just gave examples of. But there's others where, they won't know to tell their clients certain things. They won't even, like, if they're brand new to Florida, they may not know that roofs only last 15 years in Florida, apparently.
Well, actually, you just did one. The roof was 2015. You did it for me this week, I think. The roof is a 2015. It's at the end of its life, and it's a 30-year architectural shingle roof. So that is not even 10 years old.
No.
We've had a couple hurricanes come through since then.
Yeah. Yeah, if it's the one I'm thinking about, it had 2 leaks. It had granule loss everywhere.
Yeah.
They're not all like that. A lot of it's just insurance companies, I feel like, pulling numbers out there.
Yeah, but this one actually was bad.
It was bad.
Because we always go in, how old's the roof? How old's the AC?
And no permit.
Yeah.
If it's the same one I'm thinking about, there was no permit on it either.
Well, it was 2015.
They may have just told you that. Who knows?
Well, and the county doesn't keep permits after so many years anymore now. After 6, I think it is. Big key point there. When you get your roof replaced, always keep a copy of the permit and the permit number, because the county does not keep them over 6 years anymore. So how do you stay on top of these insurance issues? We're talking about insurance and how much of a pain it can be in Florida. And ultimately, when we go show these houses and we're trying to help our buyers decide which house to make an offer on, we're talking about all these insurance issues. And you can help keep me just as up to date as my insurance agent does. And you're really good to point out on the report, hey, this may be working fine, but insurance may have a problem with the age of this. Yeah. How do you stay up to date on all the insurance issues in Florida that are constantly changing?
Well, you're probably going to laugh at this. It's honestly one of those things where I don't know the changes that they've made. And each company's had their own internal standards too. Citizens is going to have a different one than Tower Hill or Frontline or whatnot. So I never know ultimately, the clients generally don't even know who they're going to go with until they're right before closing, who their insurer is going to be. But a lot of it's just, I don't know it until I hear something new. Literally, I'll just be sending these reports off. I'll note when they make a change. Like it used to be roofs weren't 15, your roofs used to be 20.
Or 5 years plus life.
5 plus life. And then water heaters were 15. And now sometimes water heaters 10, depends on where it's located in the home. If it's inside, it's 10. If it's in the garage, it can be
20.
15 to 20. And they're all different. I've had some randomly that the HVAC system has to be a certain age.
Less than 15.
But they're not all like that. And it's just one of those things where it's like, technically, scope of a home inspection, we're not required to keep up with insurance standards. I do that as a courtesy to clients, and I never state it as a fact. I just state this generally for some homeowners insurers in Florida, or most will have this opinion. You need to consult with your insurance agent. Yes. I don't tell it as a blanket statement that you have to do this or whatnot. But ultimately, there's no way I can keep up with all the Florida insurance companies' internal standards. I just know the general ones, and then as new ones come, I try to implement that as it goes.
And it really seems it's just your experience. So it's sort of like me. No one sends out a bulletin that says, hey, insurance has changed this. But because we're doing so much business, and that's why having a home inspector who does a lot of business is going to be most up to date on it versus one that is newer or only does 1 or 2 a year or 1 or 2 a month. They're not going to have the experience that someone who's doing lots of transactions, lots of home inspections, dealing with insurance a lot. They're not going to have that experience to know, hey, you know what, last month this changed.
Yeah.
Because there are things that ACs were not an issue. Now we're having to deal with that.
Yeah.
You know, so it's constantly changing. And if you're not involved in the business and staying on top of doing lots of business, you're not going to know that.
Well, I've had to educate realtors on it.
Yeah,
new realtors.
Yeah, me
or
too.
Even some that aren't new. I've had to tell them, this is a new thing that could come up.
Me too, all the time. I'm like, well, this is going to be an issue. When's the last time you did a deal? Because this has been an issue for like 6 months now.
Yeah.
Have you ever went back after another home inspector and found something major that was missed?
I always try to look at the glass half full with other inspectors in town. I can't really say specifically an example because I don't know, did the inspector mention it and the client choose not to follow through with a repair or whatnot? One that I have, this is a basic example. I had an inspector that, like, for me, I know electrical is one of my stronger suits in the areas that I inspect. I know one of the standards with like wire gauge and conductor size, for instance, like a 30 amp breaker uses a size 10 copper conductor. But that can be different. The only exception for that is on the AC system. Right. So like for an AC unit, the data plate from the manufacturer standards will always trump code. So this specific example, the AC unit had a 40 amp breaker on it, but the AC plate said the maximum overcurrent protection was 25 amps. So the inspector didn't mention because the conductors going into the 40 amp were size 8, which is appropriate for a 40 amp breaker. But it needed to technically be a 25 because that breaker is too big for the appliance itself. So you run the risk of the appliance burning up if there's an issue. The conductor and a breaker will be fine.
Right, but the appliance
won't.
And you've caught that so many times on inspections you've done for our customers. And then electrician or AC guy will come out and try to argue it and say, no, it's to code. And I'm like, it's not about code. It's about the appliance. And you're going to burn up that AC by doing it that way because Taylor taught me this,
Yep.
and we have to go back and argue it with them to get them to fix it. It's not about code. It's about the AC.
Yeah. And like I said, it just goes back to manufacturer specifications will always trump code.
Mm-hmm.
So
I don't even know that you realize you came back after someone, but I had someone who had bought a house before they knew me without me and had an inspection on it. And then they called me to sell it. And I ended up representing the buyer and the seller. And I called you to do the home inspection. And this is years ago, but it was in the East Hill area. And it ended up being a aluminum piggyback with copper wiring. So the house was originally aluminum wiring, and they tried to cover it up with piggybacking copper on it. So without investigating deeper, you wouldn't have seen it. And so whenever the buyer came to buy it and you did the home inspection, you found it. And unfortunately, that seller had just bought that house a couple years ago, and their inspector missed that. Mm-hmm. That was a major miss because they ended up having to rewire half the house. Yeah. Luckily, that was not us when they bought it, because you wouldn't have missed that, I know. But you caught it, and it was just 2 years after a previous inspection. That was there before. Yeah. I'm sure there's multiple times that happens that you probably don't even hear the feedback on the back end of how much you've protected someone.
Yeah, I know that scenario. A lot of times there will be people that will do sneaky things like that. I assume it's sneaky. I've had people do the piggyback, and if you don't open the panel or know what to look for, or you're not paying attention to that, you can easily miss that. A lot of times when I see aluminum in the panel, I want to open at least one receptacle cover to see if did they do Alumicon, did they do Copalum or anything to remediate that. One other one that's very common that I had just a couple weeks ago, another home in East Hill, they had the receptacles all reading correct. But I remembered in the panel when I looked, there was no ground wires. So I'm like, okay, how are the receptacles grounded and reading correct when there's no ground in the panel? So I opened up one just because I was curious, and they did what's called a bootleg ground. So that is when you have a 2-wire system, you have neutral and the ground, and you take a 3-inch piece of wire and you loop it around the neutral lug on the receptacle and tie it to the ground lug on the receptacle. So it tricks your tester into reading that the receptacle's fine. So luckily I was able to find that. The home's being rewired, and the home had previously been inspected. I never was privy to that information on like who inspected it or did they see that or whatnot. But I'd like to think that I probably found something that the other guy didn't notice.
Obviously, if you were inspecting again and they weren't aware of it.
Well,
yeah.
And these people had both they had the previous inspection, but they still were smart enough to get a second one as well. And maybe he found some certain things that I didn't either. But that was one that I'm like, okay, you're going to have to absolutely do a rewire, and they are doing a rewire on the whole home.
You're really like a detective. You're going in and trying to piece the puzzles. Yeah, hey, there's a clue here. Let me see.
Yeah, you got to keep all that straight in your head. And like we talked about earlier with like the flow of the report and keeping notes as you go. Like I have a note item on my desktop when I'm writing the report. Anything I need to circle back to, I write it down, and then I go back before I leave, I clear that note. So I have everything checked and cross-checked.
Yeah, I'm always impressed when I call you about a property and I'm like, hey, I got a question about this in the report. You instantly know what I'm talking about. You pull your notes up and it doesn't even take you like, let me go back, let me read it, let me think about it. You're on it right on the spot. You know what you're talking about. You've got notes on it. You're always able to answer the questions so clearly.
Yeah. Well, that's only in that aspect of my life. Yes, my wife, I can't find the ketchup in the refrigerator. I'm looking at it, which is crazy. I'm like, I'm an inspector and I can't see the ketchup bottle in front of my face.
That's a man problem. My husband has the same one. I'm like, right in front of your face to the right, second shelf down.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, oh, there it is.
Glad it's not just me.
No. So you brought up a point, though, a minute ago about they already had an inspection done and then you came in. And this is something I deal with customers all the time, where maybe a house did a pre-inspection before it went on the market, or they had an inspection and a buyer canceled, and I represent the buyer and the seller's agent's like, hey, here's a home inspection we used before, or a home inspection we've already had done for your customers to save them the money. And I'm always like, no, I don't know this guy. I don't know this inspector. Like, it's 3 months old. Like, we need to get our own home inspection. And I always recommend that versus taking someone else's home inspection. Even if it's just been done, I'm going to be like, hey, I don't know this person. How well of a job did they do?
I had one back in December. The home had just been recently inspected. They backed out. I don't know if there was what the reasoning was for that, but come to find out, I was talking with the agent and whatnot. Again, they were smart enough to do their own inspection. Like you said, it's super important to do that, especially if you don't know the other inspector. I found a leaking window in the kitchen.
Oh, wow.
I found the patio roof was leaking. I found a leak in the crawl space at the toilet. I found cut joists that were improperly cut in the crawl space. I found a tub that didn't drain. I found hot and cold reverses on your shower. Not a huge deal with that, but that was there. These were all things that were not on the previous home inspection. I don't know who that person was. I don't even really want to know, but it's just like, it's important that you have somebody has experience, that knows these things, knows where to look, because it can cost you. Like she would have had that window repair alone. I know it was extensive.
So let's talk about new construction. So a lot of people think, I don't need a home inspection. It's a brand new house. The county has inspected it. What are your thoughts on that?
County doesn't inspect like we inspect.
A lot of people don't realize when I tell them, no, we're going to do a home inspection on new construction. They're like, but why? Like, on average, we're finding 12 to 14 items. Mm-hmm. You find 12 to 14 items on new construction on almost every one of our new construction. I don't know if you realize that, but we've done the math and looked at it. Yep. And it is on average 12 to 14 items on a brand new house. Yeah. That's crazy.
I believe it. Yeah, there's certainly several examples of things I can find. I've got a PowerPoint presentation that I present to some offices around town, and that's what I talk about. It's like things that we find in new construction. Wiring is a big issue in a lot of them. It's easy to overlook. You got 60, 70 receptacles in a home. You're going to miswire one or two of them. That's something you're never going to know living in the home.
Right.
A lot of people will say, well, I got a home warranty. I can fix it if I find it as I move in. You're not going to go test all your receptacles.
No.
A reverse polarity or an ungrounded receptacle will still work just like another one. That's fine, but it has the potential for an issue down the road. Three-way wiring or two-way on lights, that's a very common one. At a hallway, you got a light in the middle, you got a switch at the end of hallway and the other end. A lot of times they don't work in tandem. You'll turn one on and it'll just flicker the light, stay on. You try and turn it off, the light will stay on until you switch the other one. So it's just a nuisance kind of thing. You probably would discover that over time, but you're most likely not going to go up in your attic. So you don't know if you got insulation issues. I had the one I did before I came here today. The insulation was all pulled back. It's not evenly dispersed over the dining room.
Well, and then they go to sell 2 years later. Matter of fact, I just closed on one today that was new construction. They just bought it 2 years ago as new construction, and they're selling it now. So it's a 2-year-old home. We got the home inspection back, and I asked them, did you do a home inspection when you bought it? Because I didn't represent them when they bought it. And they said, well, no, it was a new house. Well, there was issues that should have been caught in the beginning. There was actually a ridge vent that had no shingles on it. They just didn't go away in 2 years.
Yep.
There was never shingles on it. And they never did a home inspection, so they didn't know. If they would have done one in the beginning, they could have caught that. But now here we are 2 years
And
later.
the builder's not going to help you either because they're going to be like, well, you
This
had the
particular
option to do
builder's out of business.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wonder why. But yeah, they're not going to help you even if they are still in business because they're like, you had the option to do a home inspection, you didn't do it, your warranty's expired, you're on your own.
And it's not a structural problem. You're out of your 1 year warranty, so it's not structural. It's just wasn't built right.
Yeah.
I remember there was a new subdivision, a very nice gated subdivision in town that was being built, and I had a customer under contract to buy about a 4,300 square foot house in there, rather a large house, not cheap by any means. And this was one of the higher end homes. Home inspection came back and the nail patterns were wrong in the roof and all of the windows were installed wrong. This is over 4,000 square foot house. This is a lot of money to replace. Thankfully, you caught it and they were able to cancel the contract, even with new construction, because they were like, we're backing out of this. They were terrified of the house. If they found that, imagine what else is going on behind the walls that we couldn't see.
Exactly. Yeah. I did one for my pastor, probably 2 years ago. Up in the attic, I'm doing his wind mitigation for him. They didn't use 2.5-inch nails to nail the decking on. They used 2-inch nails, which has not been allowed since at least 2004. And called him out on it, and the builder was like, that's not true. We only use these. It passed the county inspection. And I'm like, well, here's a picture of it. I looked everywhere in that home. I didn't find a single one that was the 2.5-inch nail that's required. So, of course, I put it in the report and told them they need to fix it or recommended that they address it. And I don't know where it went from there. I think he tried to get them to sign something basically stating that if it comes up in the future that they're going to take care of it. But we had talked about earlier, you have the county inspecting stuff as you build it. I have never seen, I don't know them, but I've never seen them ever walk a roof, a county inspector. I've never seen them get up there and check that kind of stuff. So a third-party inspection is definitely going to do a little more detailed than that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And it holds the builder accountable, I think.
Well, I've asked some roofers, like, have you ever had a county inspector get out and actually walk the roof? They just started laughing.
So I always tell our customers too, your home inspection really should be your to-do list. If it's not new construction, we're going to get the builder to fix everything on there. But on a regular home inspection, on a resale, a lot of times there's issues there that aren't major. They're maintenance items. But I see a lot of people not do them. And then I go to sell the house 5 years later and they're still there. So I tell everyone at closing, hey, we put your inspection on a jump drive for you. I want you to use that as your to-do list for the next year. And let's take care of all those maintenance issues because that's going to keep the value up of your house. And a lot of people forget about that. You got to do maintenance, right?
I always tell people it's a punch list. Do ask what you can, what you can negotiate into the contract to get done up front, anything big, major, anything that's an insurance issue. And the rest is your punch list to do once you move in. And if you let it go, it's just going to snowball and you're going to have other things.
Yeah. So what should a seller do when they are preparing for a home inspection? So you're selling a house and your home inspection for the buyer has been scheduled. Is there anything a seller should do to prepare for the home inspection?
Moving stuff out of the way is super helpful. So if the home's occupied, attic access, panel access, sometimes people have a panel behind a picture. It's super helpful for me not to have to try and lift up all the pictures in the home to try and find out
Right.
where the panel is. There's been several I've had to do that for.
Well, and even the garage, moving stuff out of the way for attic access,
Yeah.
that's an important thing for them to do because you're going to have to come back.
Yep.
And it's going to inconvenience them.
Yep. Yeah, and I got to disclose it in the report initially, like, hey, I wasn't able to access the attic because occupant belongings were in the way. But yeah, certainly getting things open and accessible are areas that inspector's going to need to get to. Water heater, under your sinks, panels, attic access, all that kind of stuff. I would say also it's a kind of a catch-22 because it's helpful to not have the distraction of the sellers being present at the inspection. But it's also, there are times when it is convenient when there's something that, with my limited time that I'm there, that they may be able to point me in the direction of where it is. Like, what does this switch do? What does it control?
Right.
9 times out of 10, it's like, we don't know either. We've been here 7 years and we still don't know what this switch does. But there are times where it's helpful to reach out for that. But I would say, in general, I think the sellers not attending the inspection is more helpful than them attending, just because it's less distraction for me. I can do a more thorough job. And I have some of them. I have so many where they just literally follow you everywhere. I had one a couple months ago that this guy had to be in his 90s, hunched over, could barely walk. He followed me everywhere. Followed me. So I went around his roof. I had to do the roof from the eaves because it was too steep. Every time I moved my ladder, he walked with me the whole way around. Luckily, I think I wore him out outside. So when we got inside, he sat at the dining room table right across from me where I'm sitting and typing the report. Sat there the whole time, but I just had company the whole time when I was writing. But
So I have some tips for sellers to get prepared for a home inspection. And one of them is to remove old items that are going to cause questions. So what do I mean by that? I had an inspection done on a house. I represent the seller, and the buyers hired an inspector to come in and do the inspection. I had a brand new roof on the house. So I was quite shocked when they got the home inspection back that there was a bucket in the attic and towels wrapped around a truss that appeared to be a leak. Now, luckily, it was all dry. And so we were able to say, oh, that was prior to the new roof going on. There was a roof leak. Yes. And we disclosed that in the disclosures and everything. And luckily, the home inspector was able to say, yeah, the towel was actually dry and everything. But he had to point it out, right? Because it appeared to be a leak. And I'm like, what in the world?
Definitely draws your attention when you see that.
Why would you leave that in the attic? And they just totally forgot. They replaced the roof 6 months prior. It had a leak. They had done that. Then they put a new roof on. And they totally forgot to take the items away, like the bucket and the towel. You know, if you've had leaks in the past, I'm not saying cover anything up by any means, but if you've had stuff that's been addressed, maybe remove those items so it's not, giving an alarming notice that there could be an issue that there's not.
For sure. That definitely will draw your attention when you're in the attic and you see a bucket or anything laying around. One other thing that's similar to that is if you've had backup on your condensation line in your HVAC, like when you take your filter out underneath the air handler, you look in there, a lot of times you'll see buckets in there from where people had previous backups. So that's another thing maybe you want to take out because it puts up a red flag for me. It's like, okay, does this line back up all the time kind of deal? Is that something I need to be putting in the report to alert the client about? But yeah, certainly looking around, I know there's a lot to do when you're listing your home, but that's certainly something, if you got issues that you've not completely cleaned up or tidied up the mess from previous stuff after it's been repaired, you definitely want to get that cleaned up.
Let's talk about listing the house. Let's talk about a pre-listing inspection. And we may have a difference of opinion here, but do you think you should do a pre-listing before you put the house on the market inspection?
I think that's the way the market should shift. I think it's been so long that the buyers have always been the one to pay for the home inspection. I would love to see it where the sellers are the ones that actually pay for the home inspection. It may not be popular, but I think it helps more than it hurts. Right. Yes, there's a fee that the sellers have to pay now for the inspector's time, but you're going to know the condition of your home. You have a realistic condition of your home. You're going to subvert any potential issues from a buyer that may end up causing the sale to cancel. You're going to get a better price for your home generally because you're going to be able to fix everything up. They're not. So if you get, as a buyer and you get a home inspection, your perception of the things that are wrong are going to be a lot more expensive in your mind than they actually are. It's going to cost the seller more money than the home inspection fee, waiting for the buyer's inspector to find it, and then it's going to cost 10 times as much. You're on a timeline then. You can't dispute anything then, whereas if I do it on the seller side, the seller can talk with me about something. If I'm inaccurate or I don't know what the switch does, they can prove that the switch works. The catch is if you do an inspection on your seller's side, you need to fix the things that are found.
Right.
Don't just leave it as is and say, hey, we did an inspection, but we didn't do anything about it.
Right.
So it doesn't help you that way. But you can actually save more money doing it on the front side. And it helps you market the home too. You can say the home's been pre-inspected, but it is important. You want your seller's inspector to be very thorough.
Right.
You don't want the buyer's inspector to come and find things that the seller didn't, because you're like, why did I spend the money? This guy found this guy didn't.
Right.
So it's important. Don't just hire your friend or your neighbor to do that inspection. You want somebody that's very experienced with it, that is thorough, that's going to tell you these little things. That
but
maybe
they may still find other stuff, because
we've all got
you can
different
always
standards.
have two inspectors go in and they'll find different things.
Yeah.
And that's why I go back and forth on this. So there are times I do think it is definitely necessary to have a pre-inspection. There are other times that I'm like, I don't know if we should have a pre-inspection, because as a single agent protecting my client, once you know of something, you also have to disclose it.
Yeah.
But more times than not, when it is a house that I expect there to be major issues with, I'm like, we need to do a pre-inspection. Yeah. Let's understand what you're getting into before we put this house on the market, because that may change how we price the home. Maybe we are going to have to put a new AC and a new roof and rewire whatever the house. And so at that point, if we do all that, maybe we're going to change the pricing of the home as well. And so if I know that up front, I know how to market the house and I know how to price the house accordingly, versus maybe we priced it one way and then we're having to put all this stuff into it, and I could have priced it differently and maybe made more money for them or recoup some of those costs for them. For sure.
Well, I think one of the ways that you can do like a kind of a middle ground on it, I've recommended this occasionally, is instead of doing a full pre-listing inspection, just let me do a 4-point.
A 4-point. Mm-hmm.
And that's going to cover your roof, heating, air, plumbing, electric. It's going to cover anything major. So a 4-point is not as extensive, obviously, as a full home inspection. I'm not going to be checking your windows and your doors and all that stuff, but I'm going to check your roof. I'm going to check the condition of it, see if there's any leaks. Heating and air, I'm going to make sure the basic functions of it work. Electrical, I'm going to open all your panels and make sure that the wiring is correct, identify the type of wiring. And then plumbing, I'm going to be looking for any leaks with that. Document your water heater and its age and condition. So that gives you what the insurance companies are going to hinder you from closing on the home with.
So let's explain what a 4-point is, because not a lot of people know that, especially if they're not in Florida. So a 4-point is the resume, essentially. You have to give insurance to get insurance on your property in Florida, unless the house is, I think, less than 15 years old. If it's over 15, sometimes they still want it. Less than 10, definitely, you may not have to, but sometimes they still want to see what hurricane stuff it has on the wind mitigation report. But so if the house is over, let's say 10 to 15 years old, your buyers are going to have to give this to insurance to get a quote. You can't really get quotes in Florida that are accurate without this, because it tells them all the ages of the important things in the house that affect your insurance rate, right?
Yep.
That's really nowadays what we see stopping people from buying the house or creating issues that can't get the house to closing. So if they do that up front and make sure all those items are addressed, the other stuff's going to be minor and cosmetic.
You're at least crossing that hurdle, and that's generally the biggest hurdle with the home inspections. That's generally what we see repairs requested from the home inspection that the buyers send to the sellers, is the things that are going to inhibit them being able to insure the home.
So we've talked about buying and selling and all the stuff involved with home inspections there, but let's talk about when you're not in a transaction. You're not buying or selling a house. Should you have a home inspection?
I don't think it's a bad idea. Obviously, I'm a home inspector, so I want people to get their homes inspected as a general, like a maintenance kind of thing. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Well, I was thinking, like, for instance, my house. I just did a remodel. As you know, you re-inspected my house. I put impact windows in.
Yep.
So that actually affects my insurance. So I think it's a really good idea. Anytime you do something major to your house, if you put a new roof, change out your windows, put hurricane shutters, new AC, new hot water heater, all these things are something that affect the cost of your insurance, right?
Yep.
So
and if you do anything on those major systems that may affect your 4-point, which again, roof, heating, air, plumbing, electric, those are the 4 points they look at. And like you said, windows and doors, that's part of the wind mitigation. Windows and doors is kind of tricky though. You have to, it's an all or nothing kind of thing. So if you add one impact window, don't call me to do a wind mitigation.
Exactly.
They all need to be.
Like me with the one door that wasn't impact that I had to change out. Yes. Even for me, he's going to be honest, but that's what I love about him.
Yeah. But yeah, anytime you change any of those major appliances, it's not a bad practice to go in and let's do a 4-point just to update our insurance. Maybe I can save $50 a year. Who knows?
It's what's the average 4-point? I know it's based on square footage and stuff like that, but what's the average 4-point?
If 4-point alone, I'm generally $175.
4-point in wind mit?
together 250.
250. Okay, so I've just put a new roof on, put impact windows in, changed out my electrical panel because the companies did not like the particular brand that I had. So I changed that out.
I actually agree with them being mad about those.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, okay.
So that's a good one.
So I was limited on the carriers. So I changed that stuff out of my house. Now I know, but a lot of people don't know that just by getting that updated 4-point and wind mitt, I can save insurance. I can get requoted by my insurance agent to save some money on my insurance.
Yeah. You may even recoup your cost over time. Who knows?
Exactly. Well, and when I looked at the impact windows, that's one of the things I talked to my agent about. If I change all of the windows in my house to impact, how much is that going to save me a year on insurance? Run it that way and let me make that decision because I was recouping my money within the first 3 years. So why not?
I have that conversation with people a lot when they buy a home and I do the wind mitigation. I'm talking to them about it. Like generally in a scenario where impact protection, so your windows and doors, they've got all but 2. Like maybe their front door is not impact rated and their garage door is not impact rated. I talk to them, I have that conversation, be like, hey, maybe you do want to consider adding impact protection to your front door and your garage. Yes, it may cost you a couple $1,000s, but talk to your insurance agent as well and run this with the scenario that you have this opening protection credit. And if it costs $2,000 to say change the door out and you save $500 a year, if you're going to live here more than 4 years, you've made your money back.
Exactly. And maybe opened up to other carriers as well.
For sure.
So we did get a question from social media from Cheryl. Thank you, Cheryl, for sending in your question. But wanted to ask you, so if a home inspector reveals termite damage in one spot, what is the likelihood to finding damage in other areas?
Well, full disclosure, not a termite inspector. I don't even like to use that word in my reports. I say wood appears to be wood destroying organism.
And so let me explain this for the people that don't know. Yeah. So you're a home inspector, and then in Florida, we have something called a WDO, or wood destroying organism inspector. And so they're separate. It's a separate license, and that's all they look for is wood destroying organisms. Yeah. But you find actually sometimes more than a lot of them do. So you do a really good job. So I know this is not your specialty. I know you're not a licensed WDO inspector or pest inspector, but just give us your opinion of what you think that could lead to.
Well, generally if it's bad enough where we're seeing it through the walls or whatnot, generally it's going to be elsewhere in that general vicinity. But there are instances where I've been in a home and I see, mud tubes going up the gable end in the attic. If they're in the attic, they've probably bored up through the entire wall below it. So generally, yes, if you're going to find evidence of them in one spot, they're probably expanded at least from that area. But it's certainly something we see that we're noting it, referring it out to the WO inspector to evaluate further, and even having a contractor come out there after the WO, because the WO inspector is going to be like, yeah, there's termites here. If you need to open the wall probably to determine the extent of it and see if there's anything active, and they'll take care of that. But the WDO guys are not going to repair it. So you need a contractor out there too to assess what can be saved, what needs to be supported, what needs to be removed. But really, it's one of those things where you find it, you got to kind of chase it. You open the wall and chase it until it's gone. And
it depends on, I think, where it is and what the situation is. So yes, if you find it in the attic, like you said, that's probably a sign that they've advanced a little further. We see them sometimes like in the window seal though, that there was a water leak from the window that no one really realized. And so maybe that area, they could have expanded across that wall a little bit, but that doesn't mean necessarily they're going to be on the other side of the house unless there's a leak over there too, where they've been let go for a long period of time. So I think that's sort of hard to say yes or no. It's read the clues like you do, right? Put the puzzle together.
And you said the key there's a leak. Termites aren't going to live if there's not a water source.
Exactly.
That's a little bit of knowledge I know about them. They want moisture and they need a moisture source. So they're generally not going to be, those ones I told you about were in the attic. The moisture source was from the ground. They just burrowed up.
Wow. They've been there a while then.
Yeah. So the moisture is the key. And that's why you do annual termite bonds and they do an inspection of your home. They're looking for moisture entry, moisture damage, signs of leaks. So if there's not going to be termites if there's no moisture source.
Well, thanks, Cheryl, for your question. And thank you so much, Taylor, for being here. Always fantastic information when I get to pick your brain and learn more from you. You are a trusted provider. If anyone wants to reach out, they've done some updates on their home. They need that updated 4-point. They want a pre-listing inspection or maybe just home maintenance inspection we're going to talk about here in a minute. Give them your contact info.
The best way to reach us is via our company cell phone. So you can call it or text it. We're pretty easy with that. It's 850-572-5531. And Linda is going to be the lady that answers that. She's awesome, super friendly. She sometimes will talk your ear off, but she's great.
Perfect. And we'll put that phone number in the link so people have it. But we appreciate you so much being on the show today. Each week I do a home hack, right? So a home hack for me is something that makes homeownership easier, more fun, more cool. It can be a gadget, it can be an app, it can be an Excel spreadsheet. So this week, my home hack is actually about home inspection. I think it's a really good idea to get an inspection, let's say every 3 to 5 years, somewhere in there after you've been in the home, because there's a lot of times we live in the home and we're not checking everything. We're not getting on the roof. And by the time that leak comes in on the sheetrock in the house, it's been there for a while, right? So just having that home inspection done for your own personal knowledge to give you that maintenance list, that to-do list, especially if you're in an older home, I strongly recommend you get that done at least every 5 years for your own knowledge and to create your to-do list for you.
Yeah, 100% agree.
And you can call Taylor to get that home hack, right? Thank you so much for listening today. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Please make sure you subscribe on whatever app you're listening to us to. That way you never miss an episode. And if you have a question that you would like answered, shoot me a DM. We'd love to answer it on the air, and we may just mention you like we did Cheryl today. This is Jessica Duncan. Remember, it's just my opinion for adulting made simple.